Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Claw Studio here at the Royal Opera House in London, and to this Insight supported by Rolex. My name is Rebecca Jones. I couldn't be more delighted to be here tonight as we explore Das Rheingold, the first opera in Wagner's monumental Ring cycle. Set in a world of myth, of dream and reality, the Ring boasts, let's be honest, quite simply, some of the greatest operatic music ever written. And it's interesting, isn't it, that Wagner himself described Das Rheingold as the preliminary evening for the cycle as a whole. A precious hoard of gold is stolen from the River Rhine, and it ends up pitting gods against mortals and unleashing a chain of destruction which unveils across 4 operas. Barry Kosky's new production opened here on the main stage at Covent Garden earlier this week, conducted by Sir Antonio Pappano and featuring an outstanding cast, including Christopher Maltman as Wotan and Christopher Purvis as Alberic. And I'm delighted to say that they're going to be joining us a little later, so that's a real treat for all of us. Tonight, we're going to discuss the characters at the heart of the opera, a little bit more about the music in Das Rheingold, and perhaps a little bit more about the vision of Barry Kosky. But I don't know about you, I think an evening like this has got to start with music. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming to the stage the pianist, Sergei Rybin, and the bass, Julian Close, who is going to sing for us tonight the role of Wotan. Wow, what a way to start the evening. Julian, I know we're going to hear a little bit more from you later on, so thank you for now. But Sergei, may I invite you to come over here, because I want you to tell me and everybody watching a little bit more about the music of Das Rheingold. I was going to ask you what we should be looking out for, but what should we be listening out for?
I suppose an encounter with Wagner is always a special occasion, whether you're returning to it or you're hearing it for the first time. And I suppose I can share my experience, how it takes me. I feel like I'm joining quite a powerful stream, which takes me on on an epic journey. And in this case, with Das Rheingold, it's quite literally a journey around the world. So we start in the waters of Rhine and travel to the castle in the sky and whatnot. So it is a sort of a fascinating, fantastical world which is inhabited by gods, magical creatures, has magical objects in it, the ring, the spear, the Tarnhelm. So it's a wonderful opportunity to escape, like with a good book. But then, of course, soon one begins to realize that things mean something else than what they seem on the surface. So there are symbols for something. And I always find that very quickly I'm being pulled into a sphere of metaphysics and philosophical concepts. For example, we are invited to ponder the meaning of power, the nature of power and how it corrupts, the meaning of love, the nature of love, what are the consequences of betraying it and renouncing it. So it is quite a complex experience. Through music, we're being talked about and invited to ponder quite important big ideas.
But in terms of the music, what makes the music so special? Because opera doesn't get much bigger than this, does it?
It doesn't. I guess the orchestration is the main talking point. It is a very large, monumental work. And of course, the orchestra is one of the biggest orchestras we would encounter in opera. And there's two words I will never tire of saying: 7 harps. So there are 6 in the orchestra and 1 off stage. And the brass section is quite expanded. For example, Wagner invented a new instrument to be performing in this orchestration, the Wagner tuba, which did not exist before, which sits between a horn and a trombone. And existing instruments were sort of modified, for example, in case of bass trumpet and counterbass trombone. So there's a lot to say about the brass section. And of course, not to forget 18 anvils, which are being, we hear off stage, which representing Nibelungs at work. And they are rather sort of unassuming pieces of metal, but they make a wonderful sound.
What are the particular challenges of the score?
I suppose the scale of it.
Yeah.
The resources it requires to put this on. And big opera houses, important opera houses like this one, have an opportunity to put it on. It is a very resource-heavy piece to put on.
Yes. When did you first hear it, and what impact did it have on you?
I suppose I was about 14, and that must have been a lesson of music literature at school. And I still, to this day, remember the impression, the beginning of Das Rheingold made upon me, which I'm sure many of you know. It is one of the curiosities and wonders of operatic world, 136 bars of E-flat major harmony, beginning with a very low single drone, and then breaking down into molecules and subatomic particles until the whole space of the theater vibrates with that harmony. It's absolutely, it's one of the most exciting things about it, and I still remember sort of learning about that as a child.
And you've revisited it over and over the years? Are you still finding new things in it every time?
Of course. Yeah. Wagner is sort of the size of universe. There's always something new you come across, and lots of new things to find out and to think about.
Yeah. Well, we're going to bring Julian back in a minute, but before we do, we heard him sing Wotan now. Now, Wotan is the leader of the gods, so just tell us a little bit more about that character. Yeah.
So this is the first time we hear Wotan sing in Das Rheingold. This is the beginning of scene 2, and Fricka, his wife, just woken him up from slumber, and he was pondering eternal power and admiring the newly built shiny castle on the hill, which will later he will name Valhalla. So one thing to mention about when we approach Wagner, I'm sure a lot of you know about this, is the concept of leitmotif. Those are music segments, little musical phrases and little cells of music which accompany a character, event, or an object, which are interwoven into the matter of music, which and undulate and change with the dramatic events as we encounter them.
I love the way you describe the music, cells and molecules. You describe it almost like a scientist. It's fantastic. Well, look, as I said, Julian Close is going to come back. He sang the role of Wotan for us, but actually in this production, he is covering the roles of the giants, Fasolt and Fafner. So tell us what we're going to hear, Sergei, and whereabouts we are in the opera coming up.
So we're still in scene 2,
Yeah.
and the castle has been built. And now, so the castle has been built by the 2 giants, Fasolt and Fafner.
Yeah.
And now the payment is due. So the giants turn up to demand what was promised to them, and which is Freya, Fricka's sister. And of course, that is not really an option for Wotan and other gods. And, following confusion and trouble ensues. But now the giants have turned up and demand payment. And we clearly hear the leitmotif of the giants right there, front and center.
Okay, brilliantly explained. Well, look, Sergei, we'll let you get back to the piano. And if you would join me in welcoming Julian Close again. As I said, you are covering the roles of Fasolt and Fafner in this production. I need to know, what does covering a role involve?
Well, like the principals, of course, in that you may be called on day 1 to sing the role in a rehearsal, you have to prepare as if you were going to be called on the first day, so extreme diligence of looking at the score. I personally examine all the tests, translate them correctly, word for word, and speak them. I would also work with a German coach, for instance, and so my inflections and pronunciation are exact. Then I study the rhythms, and then ultimately I would learn the music and go to a pianist to learn the role.
But at what point are you brought into the rehearsal process?
Well, in some opera houses, it would be day 1. At the Metropolitan Opera, for instance, one is called day 1 when all the principals arrive. Yeah. And it has been the case when I've been covering that I have been required to sing immediately on day 1. Sometimes one is called in a month later when the plot has been developed and worked with the principals to see what comes out of their acting and interpretation of the roles. Yeah. But I would say as a cover, you really have to be on your mettle and do a great deal of study, because you may have to walk into a production with world-class singers, and you cannot afford to let them or the company or anybody else down. So really, you have to have a lot of will, self-determination to study extremely diligently and make sure that you know the role inside out.
But I have to ask, do you live in a perpetual state of hope that you're actually going to go on, or
both
a perpetual
hope
state
and
of dread?
angst, I would say. If it is a role that you're extremely at home with, then of course it would be a joy to perform that role. So some may be a little more nerve-wracking, and it has been the case for me that, as I say, I've been called to go on sometimes 2 months after the production opened. So you have to still keep working at home to make sure that every single day, and I always assume every day that I will be called to go on.
Yeah. What's the shortest notice you've ever been given for going on?
The morning of a performance. Last year at the Met, it was, you're singing Spada Fucilo later today, so, but that's fine.
Yeah.
So it's a relief, actually, to finally get the call and to go and do it. So otherwise, it's tenterhooks every day.
Yeah, I bet. Well,
So-
look, Julian, it's a walk in the park for you today then, because you know what you're doing. But for now, Julian Close, thank you so much. And Sergey, we'll hear more from you
Thank
as
you.
well in a bit. Thank you both. Well, at its heart, The Ring is rooted in legend. Wagner created the story of The Ring by drawing on myths and folk tales from Germany and from Scandinavia. But you don't need me to tell you that The Ring has also become a bit of a legend in its own right, hasn't it? Obviously, it's been an enormous influence on opera and classical music, but it's also been an influence on films and television and even video games. To tell us more about both the myths at the centre of Das Rheingold and also about Wagner's enduring influence on popular culture, we're joined now by Professor Carolyn Larrington from the University of Oxford.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. I just have a few moments to tell you a little bit about the Norse myths that Wagner draws upon in Das Rheingold, but I'm also going to be looking forward to some of the ways in which Wagner himself has shaped the way we think about those myths and the principal characters of the opera in the modern day. So I now have to call up for the next slide, please. So Wagner knew some Old Norse, and he made a lot of use of new translations which were beginning to be developed in the early 19th century. And we might ask ourselves why somebody who was very much involved in German nationalism chose to use Norse myths rather than German myths. But the answer is, in effect, there are no German myths. They weren't recorded because Germany became Christianized too early in its history. But at the time that Wagner was becoming interested in the myths, people like Jacob Grimm, Grimm of the fairy tales, were studying the German language and German tradition and drawing the idea of what is German very widely to pull in Old Norse mythology as well. Because if it's Germanic, it must have been in Germany at some point, was the argument that Jacob Grimm made. And so this opened up for Wagner and for quite a lot of other writers as well, a whole treasure trove of mythology which they could describe as German, even if we would now understand it as Old Norse. And so in Das Rheingold, Wagner took hold of two myths which are quite independent in the Old Norse tradition. One of them is the tale of the master builder, and the other is the tale of the gods and the gold. And the master builder tale, in essence, is very much what Wagner makes of it. There's been a war among the gods. There were two tribes of gods. They had a war, and Asgard, the home of the gods, was destroyed. The walls have come down, and a master builder turns up one day and offers to rebuild the walls. He will do it in 3 seasons, and he will do it single-handedly, except he needs the help of his faithful horse. And as a price, he's demanding the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freya. This seems like a bargain to the gods, who think that he probably won't be able to pull it off. But it turns out he's an amazingly speedy worker, and the horse is super useful in dragging the stone. So with 2 days of the contract left to go, the gods are in turmoil. What are they going to do? They're going to lose the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freya, the goddess of love and beauty. So they call for Loki, who was quite persuasive in suggesting they should get into this contract. And Loki says, leave it with me. On the last night of the contract, the master builder's working away with the help of his faithful stallion when an attractive young filly appears on the edge of the forest, and the stallion takes off after it. Work ceases at that point. The master builder flies into a giant rage, revealing himself as a giant, so legitimately he can be smashed into pieces by Thor with his mighty hammer. And, well, 9 months later, Loki, for it was he, gives birth to the 8-legged horse Sleipnir, which Odin then rides. So that's the first story that Wagner makes use of in the opera. And the second one, slide 3, please, also features Loki. Loki, Odin, and another rather mysterious god are out traveling one day, and Loki sees an otter sitting by the side of a river eating a salmon, and he throws a stone at it and kills it. He's quite pleased with that, so he skins the otter and takes it off with him. And when they go to stay at a chieftain's hall that night, Loki shows the otter skin that he's got. But it turns out that the son of the owner of the hall was a shape changer who liked to spend some of his time being an otter. And this goes down very badly indeed. The gods are not going to escape unless they can produce enough gold to cover the whole of the otter skin. Loki, again, because it's usually his fault, knows where he can get a hoard of gold. There's a dwarf who lives in a waterfall in the form of a pike, as you do, and he has a hoard of gold. So Loki goes and grabs the dwarf, gets the hoard of gold. It looks like it's enough, but oh, there's just one ring that the dwarf is holding back. And Loki says, no, I'm going to have that as well. The dwarf puts a curse on it. They take it back to the house of the father of Otter. They cover the skin with the gold. Everything is covered but just one whisker, because Odin is hanging on to that final ring. And the father of Otter says, no, you've got to cover up the whisker. So Odin puts the ring down very reluctantly, and the curse takes effect immediately. The two remaining sons of Otter's father say, where's our share? And their father says, I'm not giving you any. So they kill him. And then one of them kills the other one. So the curse takes form immediately. Now, none of this seems to have anything to do with the Rhine, but much, much later, probably in about the third opera of The Ring, that, in the original myths, is when the hoard of gold gets sunk into the Rhine, much later in the same story. Next slide, please. So, just to say a few things about the main characters that we meet in Das Rheingold. Wotan, Odin, is the leader of the gods, and he's the god of war and poetry and wisdom. He travels around the world in search of wisdom, and in particular, what he's interested in the Norse myths is to find out, are the gods really doomed? Is Ragnarök or Götterdämmerung really going to happen? He's trying to find someone who knows an alternative narrative, but he never seems to quite manage to find that person. He's cunning, he's untrustworthy, and he's very keen to hang on to his power. And Wagner's version of him does show him at the height of his powers, just before his treatment of Alberich and his double crossing of Fafner and Fasolt, shows that his moral authority is already in a state of decline. And Wotan has become very instrumental, I think, in the way that we think about this figure in the present day. We might think of Mr. Wednesday in Neil Gaiman's American Gods, recently televised, where Mr. Wednesday, Odin, becomes a kind of con man, trying to work out a scam whereby he can get his power back again by getting the gods of America to fight among one another. Or we might think of Anthony Hopkins in the Marvel comic universe, who the first time we see him in the movies, he's already tired. He's ready to lay aside his power and hand it over to Thor. But he's still anxious about losing it, and he's ready to try any dodge to hang on to at least a bit of authority. Next slide, please. Now, Loki, in contrast, has become a cult hero in the modern period. Wagner thanks in part to Jakob Grimm's interpretation of him, saw Loki as a god of fire. And perhaps he was, because we do have an image of him in a hearthstone that comes from Denmark in the 9th century with his lips sewn together. I haven't got time to tell you why that should be the case. Wagner takes over the cunning and the ambivalence of the Norse god. Loki is half god, half giant in the myths, and he's got very split loyalties. He's cunning, he's very ambivalent, and he's always ready to get the gods into trouble, but also quite good at getting them out of trouble as well. And that's really how we see him in Rheingold, as Wotan's man to go and sort things out, though always with a kind of ironic distance as to how this is going to play out. He doesn't have to change into attractive young horse in Rheingold. I think that's probably all the best as far as the staging is concerned. But at the end of the opera, he does weigh up his options, and he thinks, am I going to go into Valhalla with the rest of them? I don't think so. And already his alienation from the programme of the other gods is quite apparent there. And indeed, we don't see him in person again in the rest of the cycle. We see his effects. We see the fire that surrounds Brunhilde's sleeping place, but we don't see him again. But in modern writing, thanks to people like Joanne Harris and A.S. Byatt, and again the Marvel Loki, who's even got his own Disney spin-off series, he's become very cool. He has a queer sexuality, he's a shapeshifter, he's amoral, and crucially, he's very funny. In The Ring, he's not needed to bring about Götterdämmerung. The gods and the humans manage that all by themselves. But he is, in the modern take, instrumental in whittling away at the god's authority. Next slide, please. Then we have Thor, who is one of the most famous Norse gods operative today, I think, very much down to the Marvel comic universe. In Wagner, he doesn't have an awful lot to do except to shout and bluster, wave his hammer about, and he provides a great sky-clearing storm at the end of Das Rheingold. In the myths, though, he's the main defense against the marauding giants who are on the lookout to attack the gods and humans as well. And he keeps them in check with his mighty hammer, Mjolnir. And the evidence that we have points to him being very popular among people in the pre-Christian period in Scandinavia. They named their farms after him. They took his name as part of their own personal names. He was a protector of humans as well as being a weather god. And in the picture stone you can see here, he's rowing out with a giant companion to go fishing for the Midgard serpent, the great serpent that girdles the world. After the medieval period, Thor became a bit less important because he wasn't the ancestor of any crucial kings. And people felt that in the great face-off between Thor and Christ, Thor had actually lost. But in modern times, thanks to the Marvel comic universe, his fortunes have really picked up. Joanne Harris and Francesca Simon portray him as a bit of a meathead in some ways. He hits things first and asks questions later. But in the Thor movies, he's helping humans once again. He's keeping enemies at bay, and he's asking a few more questions before he starts wielding his hammer. Last slide, please. People often ask me why Old Norse myth is having a moment, and I always say it's been having a moment for about 300 years since it was rediscovered. But actually, I have to admit, it really is having a moment at the moment. We have endless novels being written about Loki and the other Norse gods. We have, if you remember from the invasion of the Capitol building, the QAnon shaman with his Norse tattoos, of the World Tree, of Thor's hammer. And we have movies like Rob Eggers' The Northman from 2022, with imagined rituals around the Old Norse gods. Why are we so keen on them? I think it's partly because the gods are people who move in a world like ours, a northern European world, a place of forests, of mountains and of fields. They're not wandering around in lovely weather in olive groves like the Greek gods. No, they have to put up with considerably worse climate, I think. Norse Myth's moment goes on and on, I think because it does speak so clearly to our world. It's so clearly aware of power structures and how they function, of the central importance of the world tree and how we care about nature and about the earth that we live on, and about the threat of Ragnarök, of Götterdämmerung, the end of the world in ice and fire, which now seems perhaps closer than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, that was terrific. Professor Larrington, fascinating, so interesting. I wanted to ask you, when did you first come across these Norse myths?
When I was about 7, I had The Heroes of Asgard, written by Roger Lancelin Green. And I read those with great enthusiasm, and then I sort of forgot about them. But when I was 18, I went to work in a hotel in Norway, and I met my first Icelanders there. And I suddenly realized Iceland was a real place, and they had names of Norse gods. And then I discovered I could study Old Norse myth as part of the English course in Oxford, and that was it. That was when it really became a full-time life choice for me.
Yeah, and at what point then did you make the kind of connection, I suppose, between those stories and Wagner? I mean, are you an opera fan?
Oh, an enormous opera fan. I'm coming again on Wednesday to hear Rheingold. I suppose I came quite late to Wagner. And the first time I ever saw any, my husband is a huge Wagner fan, and we went off to Amsterdam to the Muziektheater and started watching the cycle they had there in the late 90s, out of order, which confused things. So the last opera we saw was Das Rheingold, which, luckily, because I knew the story, I could make sense of it.
Yeah.
But that was my first introduction to seeing The Ring. And I've seen quite a few individual operas since then, and the Ring cycle here back in whenever it was, 2012, I think.
So what are you particularly looking forward to about coming here on Wednesday to see the production?
Well, I'm looking forward to, because part of the book that I've just written, which you could have seen on the slide just now, the first chapter is about the world tree and how central it is, the kind of organic nature of the tree at the middle of the cosmos, and how it provides the fertility for the universe, but it's also suffering. It's also trapped in time, and it's decaying. It's got serpents nibbling at its roots. It's got a squirrel running up and down. It's really networked into the rest of the universe. And I didn't know that this was going to be so central to Das Rheingold in this production, but I'm really, really looking forward to seeing that realised.
And just to pick up finally on, I mean, you made some connections with contemporary references, which was fascinating. Is it unthinkable that we would not have had Star Wars, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings without the Ring cycle, or is that putting it too far?
No, I think Wagner had the imagination to become the kind of father of fantasy, if you like, in the 1870s. And it was at that moment where people could see that you could take these stories of gods and heroes seriously in the modern age and make them mean something else. You wouldn't have had Lord of the Rings without Tolkien, and you wouldn't have had all the rest of it without Tolkien. Yeah. And Tolkien was a huge Wagner fan as well. So even though he said, my ring is very distinct from Wagner's ring, nevertheless, they are both rings.
Yeah. Professor Larrington, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really interesting. Thank you. Well, next we're going to meet some more of the characters in Das Rheingold, and Carolyn Larrington was mentioning Loki, wasn't she? Obviously in Das Rheingold, Loki is Loga, and that is where we are going next. So welcome back Sergei Rybin and also Brenton Ryan, who is going to cover the role of Loki. Great shoes, Brenton. You should be dancing, not singing. Sergei, just put this into context for us. Tell us a little bit more. I know Carolyn has touched on the role, and also, again, where we are in the opera.
Yes. So we're still in scene 2 of Das Rheingold. Loga is given a task to find a payment worthy to replace Freya, to be given to giants. Loga tells a story how he traveled all corners of the earth, trying to find what can replace love itself. And he comes to a conclusion that nothing is worthy in the world Nothing is more valuable than love in the world. But there's one creature he encountered who has renounced love, and that is Alberich. And that gave him the power to steal the gold from Rhine maidens, who are now in distress, bereft, and asked Loge to give Wotan a message and cry for help.
I'll leave you to it.
Dank Loges Lohn, für dich nur besorgt, sah ich mich durchstöbert im Sturm alle Winkel der Welt. Ersatz für die Freier zu suchen, wie den Riesen wohl recht. Umsonst sucht ich und sehe nun wohl in der Welt den Ring. Nichts ist so reich als Ersatz zur Mut und dem Mann für Weibeswonne und Wert. Weit leben und weben, in Wasser, Erde und Luft. Viel frug ich, forschte bei allen, wo Kraft nur sich rührt und keines sie kriegen, was so dem Mann am mächtigen als Weibeswonne und Wert. Doch so weit lebend und weben, verlacht nur ward meine fragende List. In Wasser, Erde und Luft lassen will nichts von Lieb und Weib. Nur einen sah ich, der sagte der Liebe ab. Rotes Gold entriet er des Weibes Gunst. Des reines klare Kinder klagten mir ihre Not. Der Nebel um Nacht Alberich bote vergebens um der badenden Gunst. Das Rheingold, da raute sich rächend der Dieb. Das dünkt ihm nun das teuerste Gut. Schwerer als Weibeshuld. Um den gleißenden Tand der Tiefe entwandt, erklang mir der Töchter Klage an dich. Wotan wenden sie sich, dass zu Recht du zögerst den Räuber, das Gold dem Wasser wiedergebest und ewig es bliebe wieder eigen. Dies zu melden, gelobt ich den Mädchen. Nun lüste Loge sein Wort.
Brendan, that's fantastic.
Thank you,
Now,
thank
look, to keep us all on our toes, you're covering the role of Loga,
Yes.
but you're actually performing and singing in this production the role of Mima,
Exactly, yes.
Alberich's brother.
Correct.
Okay.
The unfortunate brother, yes.
So you have 2 parts to learn? How does all this work?
A lot of German is how it works. Both Loga and Mima talk a lot, and so both of their roles are written in very chatty sort of ways, and so that's the first thing with both of these roles, with any role, of course, but so much of their text is sung as almost at the speed it would be spoken, really. And so that's the most important thing, I think, with these 2 roles. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about the role of Mima.
The role of Mime, so he is the brother of Alberich, who has stolen the Rheingold, and Mime actually is the master smith of the Nibelungs. And so Mime actually has the capability or the skills to forge the best of all of them. And Alberich tells him to make this Tarnhelm, which is this magical thing, that a shape-shifting object that Alberich wants to sort of use for his power. And so Alberich is so abusive to Mime. He's so horrible to him. And Nibelheim, Mime says in his monologue, used to be this wonderful place where they would make trinkets for all of the people who lived there. It was this wonderful place. Now Alberich, through this power, through the curse of the gold as well, is just turned it into a nightmare of a place. And so we meet Mime in complete distress, completely abused by his brother.
And what are the particular challenges of playing him?
I think one of the things that I find so interesting, the biggest difference between Mime and Loge, is that Mime, everything he says is 100% honest. What he feels, what he says is exactly what he thinks, whereas Loge is the opposite. You never really know if he's saying what he means. You know, this is part of his cunning, right? And so as a singer, because so much of Mima's character in Rheingold is highlighting this abuse, that it's a challenge to not get carried away with it sometimes, because we still have to remember to sing.
Yeah.
And so that's what I find most endearing about the character as well, is that he sees these strangers of Wotan and Loge, and yet he has this outpouring of trauma that he can't help but, verbally vomit essentially onto them, which is what this is, really. Yeah.
Would it be cheeky to ask you to sing a bit of Mima for us?
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
Great. I'll just change my character.
Yeah, well, while you're changing your character, Sergei, why don't we give Brendan just a couple of seconds to gather himself? So just tell us where we are in the opera now.
There's very little to add to what Brendan already said.
Yeah.
So we're now in scene 3. We traveled into Nibelheim, through the cleft in the earth, and as described, the outpouring of distress. One interesting thing to point out, listen out for the leitmotif of Tarnhelm, which sounds like this.
Okay, we've got the message. I'll leave you to it.
Gehorchen muss ich dem leiblichen Bruder, der mich in Bande gelegt. Mit arger List schuf sich Alberich aus reines Gold einen gelben Reif, seinem starken Zauber zittern wir staunend. Mit ihm zwingt uns alle, der Nibelungen nächtiges Heer. Sorglose Schmiede schufen wir sonst wohl Schmuck unseren Weibern, wonnig geschmeit, niedliche Nibelungen tant, wir lachten lustig der Mühe. Nun zwingt uns der Schlimme in Klüfte zu schlüpfen, für ihn allein uns immer zu mühen. Durch des Ringes Gold errät seine Gier, wo neuer Schimmer in Schachten sich birgt. Da müssen wir spähen, spüren und graben, die Beute schmelzen und schmieden den Guss. Ohne Ruhe und Rast dem Herrn zu helfen den Hut. Mich ärmsten, ach, mich zwang er zum Ärgsten. Ein Helm geschmeit hieß er mich schweißen. Genau befahl er, wie es zu fügen. Wohl merkt ich klug, welch mächt'ge Kraft zu eigen dem Werk, das aus Erz ich wob, für mich drum hüten wollt ich den Helm, durch seinen Zauber Albrecht Zwang mich entziehen, vielleicht, ja vielleicht den lästigen Selbstüberlisten in meine Gewalt ihn zu werfen, den Ring ihm zu entreißen, lass mich nicht jetzt den Kühnen, mir freien selber erfreuen. Ach, der das Werk ich wirkte, den Zauber, der ihm entzuckt, den Zauber erriet ich nicht recht, der das Werk mir riet und mir's entriss. Der lehrte mich nun doch leider zu spät, welche List legte den Helm meinem Blick, entspannt er, doch schwede dem Blinden schlug und schaube sein Arm. Da schuf ich mir dummen schön zu Dank.
Wow, what a treat, a real treat that was. Brenton and Sergei, thank you both very much indeed. We've got more treats for you now because we've got 3 VIPs, 3 leading members of the cast to bring you and chat to now. Please welcome Christopher Maltman, who is playing Wotan, Christopher Purvis, who is playing Alberic, and Sean Paniker, who sings Loga. Thank you. Oh, look, thank you so much for being here this evening, because I know you've got a matinee tomorrow, haven't you?
No, one more day. Sunday.
One more day, OK, that's not so bad. You've had opening night, though. You've already done 2 performances, I think. Christopher Maltman, first of all, how is it going?
Amazing, so far.
Yeah.
It's really been fantastic. It's been one of the most, I think I can speak for the entire cast, one of the most intense 6 weeks of rehearsal that any of us have ever had. To have the sort of, you know, crushing power of Tony Pappano and Barry Kosky both bearing down on us has been extremely demanding, but I think we've forged a diamond or 2 in the process.
I think so.
Tell us why it's been so intense. I'm fascinated. What it is about their working process.
It's the details. It's the detail. There's no getting away from it, really. I mean, so often, as a lazy singer, which I am, you tend to think, oh, I'll get away with that. That's probably fine. That's okay. And Tony will say, this, you need to sharpen up that. And then, of course, there's the German coach who'll be going, we're singing this in German, so you'll need to brush up on your German. and there's Barry, who is such an amazing taskmaster. And, you know, you can't be sloppy with anything because he sees everything. And so, therefore, you know, you're already on a different plane. And sloppiness goes out of the window. And and you really have to work incredibly hard.
Yeah. Sean, I know you have worked with Barry Kosky before, haven't you? And I think after this production, you're going off to be in a production of his of De Fledermaus.
Yes.
So you're having peak Barry. You can give us an insight. What's it like in the rehearsal room for you?
It is the most incredible experience. First of all, Barry is one of the most joyful people you will ever meet in this business. And that makes rehearsal, as challenging as it is, an absolute joy. Because you go and play. And basically when he had a big hand in casting Rheingold, and I think he really just wanted people that played well with others and were willing to come to the room and have fun and dig into it. And as Chris just said, the level of detail and just the intricate work we do, we could never just take it easy. Some days you just don't want to do anything. You just want to show up in rehearsal and kind of coast through it. You can't do that because then you lack intention in everything that you're doing. And between Barry and Tony, just every single word was crafted in a way that I couldn't have possibly imagined before we got here. I've never worked on a production that was this detail-oriented in my life.
Interesting.
And it serves the art form so well when everything is so crafted. I mean, and Rheingold it's more like a play that happens to be sung. And so that level of detail, as if you were a stage actor doing a straight play, is what's necessary, and that's what they both brought to it. And they worked so well together. It's unbelievable that they haven't worked together before.
I was very struck, actually, when I was fortunate enough to see it on Monday, the clarity of the storytelling, which I thought was exceptional. You mentioned the casting. I'm dying to know, I mean, you are all, you know, serious singers.
Old?
Do you? No, serious. Do you audition? Are you approached? How are you cast?
Personally, I was asked.
Right.
And it came as a very great surprise to me. And I said no. I did. I turned it down. And
because?
Simply because my repertoire at that point was... exactly. I was washing my hair that day. So my repertoire at that point was heavily in the sort of big Italian repertoire, and I said I didn't really have much interest in Wagner, to be completely honest. And then my wife said, "What are you doing?" And so then I sort of revisited the offer and just said, "Look, have you found a Wotan yet?" And they said no. So then I started to throw myself into it, and I sang my first Walküre Wotan, which is the jewel in the crown for any baritone. I mean, it is the greatest role I think I've ever sung. It's the greatest opera I've ever been involved with. And I was blown away. I was completely in love from bar one.
Fantastic. Chris, what about you? Were you approached as well?
I was approached, yeah. But they wanted someone who was bald to go with Wotan.
It's only
So
jealousy.
I said, I'd get rid of my hair.
Just so he can look like me.
No, I worked with Barry for the first time 8 years ago on an amazing production of Saul down at Glyndebourne.
Oh yes, I saw it. Yes.
Yeah, and it was one of those life-changing moments where you suddenly realise that you're in the presence of greatness, and you want a part of it.
Yeah.
Why would you not want to work as often as possible with this great man? So we got on extremely well, and Barry is very faithful to those people who he thinks have, you know, got the spark. Yeah. And have got the acting chops to go with the vocal ability. And therefore, you know, if you deliver one time, then you usually get a second time as well. And it just carries on. And so this has just been, for me, it's just been incredible. I did a Falstaff with him 2 years ago down in Aix-en-Provence, and I don't think they really enjoyed it very much. But we had the best.
Who cares about the audience?
If I could just add one thing, it's sort of quite an interesting thing, I think, because people who don't perform or aren't in these kind of casts don't understand how precious and rare it is to have an environment in which you feel completely protected, and that's what Barry provides. He is a lion. He will, you know, you are completely free in that room. You will never be ridiculed. You will be.
Oh, no, I was.
You'll be joked about, but you know, he will never ridicule you for trying.
Yeah.
And that's all he wants.
I'll just also give because what Chris has just said is so true. After week 1, I had to go to hospital to have my appendix out. Great timing. And I rang Barry from the hospital saying, look, this is what's going to happen. I don't know when I'm going to be able to come back, but they're saying 2 weeks. And Barry immediately said, don't worry, we're not going to get any other Albrecht at all. No other Albrecht will come into the room. I won't rehearse with anyone else apart from you. And you know, my anxiety just flew out of the window. Because, of course, you know, when you are in a hospital and beholden to the doctors, you've no idea. I mean, it's quite right that they could have said, bye-bye. We're going to get someone who'll be, you know, here to rehearse now.
Yeah.
But and it was such a beautiful thing for him to say. And so to feel that amount of safety was really an amazing thing. Really amazing.
We're lucky. Sean, we ought to say that this is your Royal Opera House debut, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Many congratulations.
I was meant to be here during the pandemic, but that got cancelled and rescheduled, and it'll come back.
So how has it been for you? What's
It's
it like
been
working
lovely.
here? Yeah.
Absolutely lovely. I couldn't have imagined a better place to work. It's just, I mean, the space that we have in rehearsal has been so amazing to be in. It's been just so much fun to come into work. And a lot of that is Barry and Tony and the culture at Royal Opera House with Ollie and Peter and everybody that are here. It's just, it doesn't feel, some large houses sometimes feel like a factory where you're kind of meaningless, and that's not the case here.
Really?
Everybody feels
Do tell us
nice
which
and
ones.
valued. I think we know which places I'm talking about.
Okay, I want to talk to you, Chris Purvis, if I may, a little bit about your character of Albrecht, because, you know, here he is. He's a complex character, isn't he? But he's not a straightforward villain. Would you think that's a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think if you were to play him as a straightforward villain, you know, it's so boring. You know, lots of sort of twiddling of moustaches and cape acting. That's not the way it works. I think that you, as a performer, as an actor, you always have to find a way for the audience to come and go on this particular, I hate the word, but I'm going to say it, journey with you. And otherwise they won't. And so there has to be some, I don't know, some layer of sympathy that the audience has to have for Albrecht. So in the first scene, when he's teased and humiliated by the ladies, by the Rheinmaidens, it's a moment where you do see the vulnerability. And vulnerability is a very powerful tool for an actor because you can play on that. You know, you can say to the audience, as it were, saying, look, you know, remember what it was like. That's why I am what I am. That's why I swiped the gold. I'm only a product of that humiliation. Yeah. Nothing else to do with me, you know. Yeah. So in a way, you know, Barry has heightened that humiliation in the first scene. And so it does make it so much easier for the rest of the opera to play a slightly more complex and a slightly more nuanced role.
Yeah. Chris, you talked about the fact that you initially turned the role down and then you thought about it again. I mean, I'm sure it must be quite a daunting role, and I know you've compared it to playing Hamlet and Lear, I think. Vocally, how demanding is it?
In the first installment, in Das Rheingold, it's not so difficult. I mean, there's still some big moments in there, but it's nothing compared with the huge Act 2 monologue of Walküre the whole of the Schlussszene in Act 3, and then Act 3 of Siegfried, which is absolutely massive. So it doesn't have quite the same vocal challenge as Walküre or Siegfried, but I tell you what, this opera punches way above its weight in terms of concentration. What I didn't expect, you go through a role and you highlight it and you see how much sort of yellow highlighter you have in your score and you're flipping through it. Lots of pages are not in this, So you think, it's not going to be desperately difficult. But as Wotan in Das Rheingold, you come on stage at the top of Act 2 and you don't leave the stage.
Yeah.
That's it. You're on stage for just over 2 hours. And it is concentration, 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 because of this culture that we have had of us being valued and instructed and encouraged as actors. The number one thing is to listen. You have to know what's going on around you, the voices of everybody else. If you're not following the dialogue, if you're not current, and if you're not reacting to what's going on stage. You can't just pre-program a response. And every night, you sort of feel a little bit different. You take it in a slightly different direction. And you're surfing the wave of comprehension of everybody else's dialogue. And that is, for 2 hours, it's a lot.
Yeah. And Sean, as well as obviously the singing demands on you in your role, yours is a very physical performance, isn't it? I mean, you're never still, it seemed to me. How have you kind of paced yourself?
How have I paced myself? I haven't jogged as much while I've been in London. Normally I jog almost every day, but here, the show, I am tremendous. It's like a workout.
Yeah.
And, like Chris mentioned, you're on and then you don't go away. And so normally for a singer, you're drinking a lot of water and you're thinking, okay, when am I going to go to the bathroom? But I sweat so much in this show that I never have to. The jacket, I take off the jacket and it is drenched.
I can testify to this.
It is drenched. And it weighs so much, it's unbelievable. But Barry really had that concept of just going and going and going, and it really works with the character, so I was happy to do it. And it makes it more interesting for me as an actor to be able to play that way, as opposed to just standing still and observing. It's much more interesting for me on stage.
Chris, I'm right, aren't I, that you've played Alberic before? Am I right, at Zurich Opera? Yeah. So what is it like revisiting a role you've played before and bringing something new and fresh to it?
I suppose, with the if you consider that the productions are completely different.
That helps.
It does. It really does help, and it just means that you find yourself in a completely different situation, wearing different clothes. You're saying the same words, of course, but again, I'm going to use this word nuance. That's sort of quite important, because each person you're talking to, each person you're listening to, will say something in a slightly different way to the one in Zurich, for instance. So it's almost like a completely different story. Well, it's not a different story. That's a stupid thing to say. Silly me. But it's just a different way of delivering. Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, each director has his own way of trying to encourage. What do they want to elicit from this particular phrase, this particular sentence? And that will send you in a slightly different direction personally to perhaps the one that I'm currently doing in this production.
Yeah. Antonio Pappano has described Das Rheingold as mainly a talking piece. And actually there are, although we've probably given a slightly different impression this evening, but there are not that many sort of big standalone arias, say in the Italian operas that you've already talked about, Chris. I wondered, what's that like for you as a performer? I mean, you've already talked about having to concentrate on stage for 2 hours, but it's a different kind of singing, is that fair to say?
Yes, I'm just horribly jealous of these two who get to sing loads. No, I'm absolutely not.
Your opera will come.
No, don't worry, I get my payoff.
Exactly.
I really do get my payoff. But no, absolutely not. It's every phrase, every line that we sing is so heavy with intention and meaning. And this is also the genius of Wagner's composition. We have this sort of tasting platter of what's to come. and there are hints of the music from everything else. And if I may, just one very quick anecdote, which I never believed until I did Rheingold myself, which is there was a friend of mine who, when he was a child, his parents were not operatically minded at all, and he desperately wanted to go to the opera. And his father, who was a naval commodore, was incredibly stuck up about it and hated opera, and his mother dutifully went along and took him until this small child discovered Wagner and wanted to go to the Ring Cycle. And his father, you know, in any opera would just grab his hand at the end and whisk him out of the theatre as quickly as possible. And his father was a very smart man, so he worked out that he would be in the opera fewer hours for Das Rheingold and Siegfried than for Die Walküre and Götterdämmerung. So he said, well, I'll take you to Rheingold and to Siegfried, and your mother can take you to the other two. So there he sat down next to his father, and Rheingold ended, and he was waiting, you know, this 11, 12-year-old boy waiting for his father's hand to drag him out of the opera.
Yeah.
And he turned around, and his father had tears rolling down his face. And he said, I get quite emotional about this, but he said, I think I'll take you to all of these, he said. And he went to the whole Ring and became a complete Wagner addict. And I can believe it. Until I did it, until I was involved in his music, I had no clue. And then the doors opened to paradise. It's just the greatest thing.
Oh, I have to ask all three of you, have you read the reviews? Go on, be honest.
They were sent to me by the German coach, Franziska Roth. And she didn't send all of them, but where it said, and Christopher Purvis's fantastic diction, she highlighted it, and you could see her going. So by proxy, I've read some of them, and,
Okay.
and I've got the mad cousins who send stuff to me, and I try not to take too much notice, but I mean, obviously, for this production, they've been extremely good, and so I'm
4
very
stars
grateful.
across the board.
Yeah.
No weak link in the cast. Quotes. Have you read any of them, Sean?
Yeah, I've read them, and you just take it with a grain of salt. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just somebody's opinion, and we hear the applause at the end, and we know that the audience seems to like it, and but that's really what matters.
Yeah, Chris.
My wife is the gatekeeper of reviews, and normally she doesn't allow me to read them at all, but she read a couple and then said, I think you can read these ones. And I did. But again, it's always lovely to read something nice that's been written about you. But, you know, it's the cart before the horse if you chase somebody else's opinion. Yeah. And what we've made here is reward enough.
Yeah, no. Well, I think that's the perfect note on which to end, to be honest with you. Chris and Sean, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Terrific stuff. Well, look, we've just got a bit of time left to hear some more music. And one of the characters that we haven't really discussed at all so far is the earth goddess Erda, who plays a very important role in this opera, as any of you who have read any of the reviews will know. So I'm going to invite Sergei back onto the stage, if I may, and also Rhonda Brown, who is covering the singing role of Erda. Sergei, tell us what's going on.
So we are towards the end of the opera in scene 4 and towards the latter part of it. So the ring is wrenched away from Alberich. He curses it. And now there's a row broken up who will possess the ring. And Wotan is not keen to let go. In the middle of all of that appears a figure of eternal Mother Earth, who gives Wotan a grave, grave warning to give up the ring. And this is what we're going to hear.
Doch höchste Gefahr führt mich heut selbst zu alles, was ist, endet. Ein düsterer Tag dämmert den Göttern. Der Rat ich meide, den Ring.
Rhonda, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. Just a quick word, if I may, because this production is unusual, isn't it? Because there are essentially two Erders, aren't there? There's an actress playing one Erder, and then there's a singing Erder, which is the role that you're covering. Tell us a little bit more about that and why it is.
Well, for a start, I'm quite pleased I don't have to be the actress Erder.
She doesn't have many clothes on, does she?
No. I really love it. I think Erder for me is such a personification or manifestation of just this incredibly deep, earthly wisdom but brings that real femininity to it. And she's been there forever and seen everything. And I think when we get to the point where she brings yet another, or it feels like yet another warning to Wotan, it's almost like she's sort of, look, I've been here before, I'm eternally here, and yet once again I'm going to bring you this warning, this wisdom. And it's just this, I think her presence on the stage throughout it is just this constant reminder of this wisdom, this guidance that she offers us.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Rhonda, we've got to leave it there, but thank you
No
so
problem.
much.
Thank
It's
you.
been terrific.
Thanks very
Thank
much.
you. Well, I don't know about you, but I think, given this is the Ring, we should end where we began and with some final music from Wotan. So, Sergei, tell us what we're going to hear.
So we're right near the end. The Ring has been given up and Fafnir disappears with it. And now the gods, headed by Wotan, are ready to cross the Rainbow Bridge and reside in Valhalla. But the warning which Erda has given Wotan lays heavy on his heart, and we hear this in this music.
Yeah, let's welcome back Julian Close. Julian, Sergei, thank you so much. That is just about it for tonight. I hope you feel that we've, in the words of Christopher Maltman, enabled you to enter a little bit of paradise this evening. Barry Kosky's production continues here on the main stage at Covent Garden until the 29th of September, and you can watch it live in cinemas on the 20th of September. I just really want to thank all our guests, everyone who has sung and performed and talked to us this evening. It's been fantastic and wonderfully invigorating. Thank you. Thank you also to our audience here in the Claw studio. And thank you also to all of those of you who are joining around the world online to listen and watch to this insight supported by Rolex. I'm Rebecca Jones. Thank you for joining me, and bye-bye.